3 years. That's how long she stayed silent. She cooked his meals, ironed his suits, and played the role of the dutiful, simple housewife while he built his tech empire. He called her bring. He called her a burden. And on their 3rd anniversary, he didn't give her a diamond, he gave her divorce papers. He threw her out for a woman with status, convinced his quiet wife was a nobody who couldn't possibly understand his world of billion-dollar mergers. But he made a fatal calculation. He didn't know that the mysterious venture capital firm he was desperate to impress, the only one that could save him from bankruptcy, wasn't run by a stranger. It was owned by the woman he'd just kicked out of his house. And by the time he realized who she really was, it wasn't a marriage counselor he needed. It was a bankruptcy lawyer. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like 1,000 tiny fists demanding to be let in. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. Genevieve Jen Sinclair sat at the long mahogany dining table. She had set it for 2 bone china crystal glasses and a vintage bottle of Chateau Margaux, Harrison's favorite. The roast duck, glazed with the orange reduction she'd spent 3 hours perfecting, was sitting in the center, slowly going cold. It was 8:45 p.m. She looked at her watch. Harrison was 2 hours late. Again, she wasn't surprised. Over the last 6 months, Harrison Prestwick, the CEO of Prestwick Dynamics, had become a ghost in his own home. When he was there, he was glued to his phone, screaming at his VP of operations or obsessively checking the stock ticker. His company, once the darling of the Nasdaq, was hemorrhaging cash. The failed launch of the Ether drone prototype had cost them millions, and rumors on Wall Street suggested that Sequoia Capital and the Vanguard Group were losing faith. The sound of the front door unlocking cut through the silence. Harrison walked in. He didn't look at the table. He didn't look at the food. He definitely didn't look at Genevieve. He was shaking his umbrella out on the marble foyer, talking loudly into his AirPods. "I don't care what the board says. Bianca, tell them if they want to oust me, they'll have to drag me out by my hair. I need that meeting with the Apex Group. If we secure their funding, we're back in the game. If not, we're dead. Fix it." He tapped the earbud to end the call and finally looked up. He paused, seeing the candlelight. A look of annoyance, rather than guilt, flickered across his handsome, sharp-jawed face. "Jen?" He sighed, loosening his tie. "I told you I'd be late. Why do you do this?" "It's pathetic." Genevieve remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress. No jewelry. Her face was bare of makeup, revealing a natural beauty that Harrison had once written poems about, but now seemed to find irritatingly plain. "Happy anniversary, Harrison," she said, softly. Harrison groaned, walking to the wet bar and pouring himself a whiskey, ignoring the wine she had opened. "Right. 3 years. Look, Jen, we need to talk, and I don't have the energy to sugarcoat it." He turned, leaning against the bar, swirling the amber liquid. Us. It's not working. It hasn't worked for a long time." Genevieve didn't blink. "Because of the company. Because of you," he snapped. "Look at you, Jenrus. You're simple. You're content with baking bread and reading novels. I'm running a multinational corporation. I'm dealing with sharks like Larry Fink and the regulators in DC. I come home and I need a partner who understands power, who understands leverage. You ask me if I want tea." He reached into his briefcase, a leather briefcase Genevieve had bought him with her allowance, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping inches from the cold duck. "Divorce papers," Harrison said. "I've been generous. You get the house in the Hamptons, the small one, and a lump sum of 2 million. But you sign tonight. I need this done." Genevieve looked at the envelope. She didn't reach for it. "Is this about Bianca?" Harrison froze. "Who told you about Bianca? I'm a housewife, Harrison, not blind." Genevieve said, her voice steady, devoid of the tears he expected. "Bianca Sterling, your new chief strategy officer, daughter of the oil tycoon Robert Sterling. You think marrying her will secure the capital you need to save Prestwick Dynamics?" Harrison's eyes narrowed. "You're smarter than you look. Yes." "Bianca gets it. She has connections. She can get me into the room with the Apex Group. Her father plays golf with the Apex CEO. You're a nobody, Jen. You're an orphan from Ohio. You have no name, no legacy. You're holding me back." He took a sip of whiskey, his eyes cold. "Sign the papers, General. Don't make this ugly. You won't win." Genevieve stood up slowly. For the first time, Harrison noticed something different about her posture. Usually she was slumped, making herself smaller. Tonight, she stood tall, her spine steel straight. She reached into her purse, which was sitting on the chair next to her. Harrison flinched, expecting a tissue or a desperate plea. Instead, she pulled out a fountain pen, a heavy black Mont Blanc with gold inlay. "You're right, Harrison," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its softness. "I don't fit in your world." She flipped the envelope open, turned to the signature page, and signed her name with a flourish. Genevieve A. Sinclair. She tossed the pen down. "I'll be out within the hour." Harrison blinked, stunned. He had prepared for screaming for begging. This easy surrender felt wrong. "Just like that. Just like that," she said, walking past him toward the bedroom. She stopped at the doorway and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Harrison, good luck with the Apex Group. I hear their CEO is notoriously difficult to please." Harrison scoffed. "I'll handle the CEO. I just need to get in the room. Something you'd know nothing about." Genevieve smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Goodbye, Harrison." The next morning, the sun was shining over the financial district, but Harrison Prestwick felt like he was walking into a funeral. He sat in the back of his town car, Bianca Sterling next to him. Bianca was everything Genevieve wasn't. Loud, sharp-edged, wearing a Versace suit that cost more than Genevieve's entire wardrobe, and constantly typing on her BlackBerry. "Did she sign?" Bianca asked, not looking up from her screen. "She did," Harrison said, rubbing his temples. "Took the 2 million and left. Didn't even fight for the city apartment." Bianca laughed, a harsh barking sound. "God, she really was a doormat. Good riddance." "Now focus. The meeting with the Apex Group is confirmed for 10 o'clock a.m. Do you know how hard I had to work to get this? My father had to call in a favor with Senator Reynolds just to get them to look at our proposal." I know, Harrison said, adjusting his tie nervously. The Apex Group was a ghost legend in the finance world. They were a private equity firm that had seemingly popped up out of nowhere 5 years ago, aggressively acquiring distressed tech companies, turning them around and selling them for billions. No one knew who the principal owner was. The firm was represented by a board of proxies. If Apex bought into Prestwick Dynamics, Harrison's stock would triple overnight. If they passed, the creditors would come knocking by Friday. The car pulled up to 4 World Trade Center. The Apex Group occupied the top 3 floors. Harrison and Bianca stepped out, flanked by their legal team. They took the private elevator to the 72nd floor. The lobby was sleek, minimalist, and intimidating. Glass walls, modern art that looked like jagged steel, and a reception desk manned by a woman who looked more like a model than a secretary. "Harrison Prestwick and Bianca Sterling," Bianca announced, slamming her designer bag on the counter. "Here to see the board." The receptionist didn't flinch. She checked her screen. "Ah, yes, the chairman has decided to take this meeting personally." Harrison's eyes widened. "The chairman, I thought we were meeting the acquisitions team." "The chairman has taken a special interest in your file," the receptionist said with a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Please go right through. Boardroom A." Harrison straightened his jacket. "This is it, Bianca. The chairman. If I charm him, we're golden." "Just let me do the talking," Bianca hissed. "Men, listen to me." They walked down the long corridor. The double doors at the end were made of frosted glass. Harrison pushed them open. The boardroom was massive. A view of the entire Manhattan skyline stretched out behind a table long enough to land a plane on. But the room was empty, save for one person. At the far end of the table, a high-backed leather chair was turned away from them, facing the window. "Mr. Chairman," Harrison called out, stepping forward, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm Harrison Prestwick. This is Bianca Sterling. We're honored you're seeing us." Silence. "We have the projections for the Q3 drone launch." Bianca cut in her voice, confident. "We can guarantee a 200% ROI within 6 months if you bridge the Series C funding gap." The chair slowly began to swivel. "200% is ambitious, Harrison," a voice said. Harrison froze. His blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. But it was impossible. That voice belonged in a kitchen in Seattle, asking if he wanted tea. It didn't belong in a billion-dollar boardroom in Manhattan. The chair finished turning. Sitting there was a woman wearing a blood-red Armani power suit. Her hair slicked back in a sharp, modern bob. She wore diamond earrings that caught the morning light. Her makeup was fierce, accentuating eyes that looked like shattered glass. She rested her elbows on the table, interlacing her fingers. "Especially," the woman continued, "since your VP of Operations just quit this morning and your supply chain in Taiwan has been severed." Harrison's mouth fell open. He staggered back, gripping the back of a chair for support. "Jen," he whispered. Bianca looked between them, confused. "Who is this? Where is the chairman?" Genevieve smiled. It was the same cold smile she had given him the night before. "I am the chairman," Genevieve said. "Well, chairwoman, technically. But in this room, I prefer Ms. Sinclair." "This is a joke," Harrison stammered, his face turning red. You're a housewife. You bake bread. You don't own the Apex Group." Genevieve laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "Oh, Harrison, you really never did ask about my family, did you? You assumed Sinclair was just a common name. You never connected it to the Sinclair Trust." Harrison stopped breathing. The Sinclair Trust. The oldest, most secretive banking dynasty in Europe. Old money. The kind of money that buys countries. "My grandfather founded the trust," Genevieve said, standing up and walking slowly toward them. The click of her red-bottomed heels echoed in the silent room. "When my parents died, I inherited everything. But I wanted to be loved for me, not my billions. So I lived simply. I found a man who I thought was ambitious and kind. I married him." She stopped inches from Harrison, looking up at him with eyes full of pity and disdain. "I spent 3 years testing you, Harrison. I wanted to see if you were a partner. Instead, I found a leech." She turned her gaze to Bianca, who looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "And you," Genevieve said. "Bianca Sterling. Daddy's little girl. You called me a doormat yesterday." Genevieve picked up a remote from the table and clicked it. A screen descended from the ceiling. It displayed a live stock ticker. Prestwick Dynamics, PWD, was in free fall, a red line plummeting straight down. What is that?" Harrison gasped. "That," Genevieve said, "is what happens when the Apex Group publicly announces they are shorting a stock. We just dumped 5 million shares of your company, Harrison, and since I own the majority of your debt, as of 10 minutes ago I initiated a hostile takeover." She leaned in close to his ear. "You wanted to get in the room with the owner, you're here. Now get out of my building before I have security throw you out." Harrison stumbled out of 4 World Trade Center, his tie undone, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn breeze. Bianca was already on the phone screaming at her assistant to sell her personal shares in Prestwick Dynamics before the market closed. "We're ruined," Harrison muttered, leaning against the cold stone of the building. "She owns the debt. She's calling the loans. They'll seize the patents, the inventory. Everything." Bianca hung up the phone and turned on him, her eyes blazing. "Stop whining, Harrison. It's pathetic. You were married to the heir of the Sinclair fortune for 3 years, and you didn't know. How stupid are you?" "She drove a 2015 Honda Civic," Harrison shouted back, drawing stares from passers-by. "She clipped coupons. How was I supposed to know she was sitting on $1 billion? It doesn't matter," Bianca snapped. "We need damage control. My father isn't going to bail us out if you lose the company. We need a lawyer, a real one, not your corporate legal team." She scrolled through her contacts and stopped at a name that made even Harrison flinch. Preston Gage. Preston Gage was not a lawyer you hired to draft a will. He was a lawyer you hired to destroy someone's life. He was known in New York as the Butcher of Wall Street. He cost $2,000 an hour, and he had never lost a high-profile divorce case. An hour later, they were sitting in Gage's office in Midtown. The room smelled of old leather and cigar smoke. Gage was a small man, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looking more like a university librarian than a shark. He listened to Harrison's story without blinking his fingers, tapping rhythmically on a legal pad. "So," Gage said, his voice raspy, "let me get this straight. You signed a separation agreement last night." She signed it. "You gave her $2 million and a house." "Yes," Harrison said. "It's over." Gage stopped tapping. He looked at the briefcase on the floor. "Where are the papers, Harrison?" Harrison blinked. "In my bag. I was going to have my assistant file them with the court this afternoon." A slow, predatory smile spread across Gage's face. He extended his hand. "Give them to me." Harrison hesitated, then pulled out the manila envelope containing the document Genevieve had signed the night before. Gage took the envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't read it. He stood up, walked over to the paper shredder in the corner of the room, and fed the entire envelope into the machine. Whirr. Crunch. Harrison jumped up. "What are you doing?" "That was the agreement." "That," Gage said, brushing dust off his hands, "was a mistake. If that document was filed, you would be divorced, and you would have settled for nothing." Gage walked back to his desk and leaned forward. "Harrison, think. You are currently married to Genevieve Sinclair. In the state of New York, and given your residence in Washington, assets acquired during the marriage are subject to equitable distribution. Apex Group was founded 5 years ago, but its massive growth, the creation of value, happened while she was your wife." Harrison's eyes widened as the realization hit him. "You mean—" "I mean," Gage whispered. If you are still married, half of her empire is technically your empire. You don't need to beg her for a loan to save your company. You can sue her for half of hers. She's a Sinclair, Bianca said, sounding skeptical but intrigued. She has armies of lawyers. And we have the element of surprise, Gage countered. She thinks you're defeated. She thinks the divorce is a done deal. She doesn't know you never filed the papers. We are going to file a countersuit. We aren't filing for divorce, Harrison. We are filing for an emergency freeze on all marital assets due to suspected financial fraud by your spouse. Harrison sat back, a dark grin forming on his face. The fear was gone, replaced by greed. She played me, Harrison said. Now I'm going to take everything she has. 3 days later, Genevieve sat in her corner office at Apex Group. The room was a hive of activity. Her assistants were managing the acquisition of Prestwick Dynamics. It was brutal but necessary. She was stripping the company for parts, selling off the drone division to Lockheed Martin, and keeping the software patents for herself. It was the only way to salvage the mess Harrison had made. She felt a strange sense of peace. The secret was out. She no longer had to hide her intelligence or her heritage. She was free. Or so she thought. The double doors to her office burst open. Genevieve looked up, expecting her VP. Instead, she saw 4 uniformed NYPD officers, followed by Harrison Bianca and a man she recognized instantly from the tabloids, Preston Gage. "What is the meaning of this?" Genevieve asked, standing up. "Security." "Security can't help you, Mrs. Prestwick," Gage said smoothly, stepping forward and tossing a thick stack of documents onto her desk. "It's Ms. Sinclair," she corrected, her voice icy. "Not according to the state of New York." Gage smiled. "My client, your husband, never filed the separation agreement, which means you are still legally married. And since you failed to disclose the existence of the Apex Group during your marriage, you have committed matrimonial fraud." Genevieve looked at Harrison. He was wearing a new suit, looking smug and revitalized. He walked around her office, running a finger along the edge of a Ming vase. "Nice office, Jen," Harrison said. "A little flashy for you, isn't it? I thought you liked simple things." "Get out," Genevieve said, her hands balling into fists. "I don't think I will," Harrison replied. "See, the judge just signed a temporary restraining order on all marital assets. That includes Apex Group's operating accounts. You can't move a dime without my signature. You can't sell my company. You can't even buy a coffee with the company card unless I approve it." Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the court order. It was legitimate. Judge Holloway, a known associate of Preston Gage, had signed it an hour ago. "You're trying to blackmail me," Genevieve said quietly. "I'm trying to get what's fair," Harrison said, leaning in close, invading her personal space. "You lied to me for 3 years. You sat there watching me struggle while you sat on a gold mine. You humiliated me. Now I want 50% of Apex, or I burn it to the ground." Bianca chimed in from the doorway, checking her nails. "We're willing to settle, of course. Drop the hostile takeover of Prestwick Dynamics, inject $200 million into Harrison's company, and give him a seat on the Apex board. Then we'll sign the divorce papers." Genevieve looked at her. Them. The betrayal she felt 3 days ago had been painful. This was war. She took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her red blazer. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. "You want a seat at the table, Harrison?" she asked softly. "I demand it," he said. "Fine," Genevieve said. She reached for her intercom. "Alice, please cancel my afternoon appointments and get the legal team for the Sinclair Trust on the line. Oh, and send an invite to Mr. Prestwick for the Obsidian Gala this Saturday. Harrison frowned. The gala, why? If we are partners, Genevieve said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. We should appear together in public. The Obsidian Gala is where the real business happens. All the major shareholders of the trust will be there. If you want to claim your piece of the pie, you better be there to convince them you're worthy of it. Harrison puffed out his chest. I can handle a few shareholders. Good, Genevieve said. Wear a tuxedo. And Harrison, don't be late. As they left. Preston. Gage paused at the door, looking back at Genevieve with a frown. He was a shark, and he knew the scent of blood. But for the first time in his career, he couldn't tell if the blood in the water was hers or his. The Obsidian Gala was the most exclusive event on the East Coast social calendar. Held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically in the Temple of Dendur. It was a gathering of old money, the kind of money that didn't shout but whispered and made governments topple. Harrison arrived with Bianca on his arm. He felt like a king. The court order had worked. The banks had frozen Apex's acquisition attempts. He had Genevieve cornered. Look at this place, Bianca whispered, eyeing the crowd. There's the CEO of Goldman Sachs and the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. Harrison, if we pull this off, we are royalty. Harrison adjusted his bow tie. We've already won, Bianca. Genevieve is terrified. That's why she invited us. She wants to surrender gracefully in front of her board. They moved through the crowd, Harrison shaking hands, introducing himself as the co-owner of Apex Group. He relished the confused looks on people's faces. Let them be confused, he thought. Tomorrow, they'll know my name. The lights in the vast hall dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage set up in front of the ancient Egyptian temple. Genevieve walked out. She was breathtaking. She wore a dress made of black velvet that seemed to absorb the light, adorned with diamonds that were undoubtedly family heirlooms. She looked regal, untouchable, and terrifyingly calm. She stepped to the microphone. Welcome, friends, partners, and esteemed guests, she said, her voice amplified through the hall. Tonight is a night of celebration, but it is also a night of truth. Harrison squeezed Bianca's hand. Here it comes, he whispered. The concession speech. For 3 years, Genevieve continued, I lived a double life. I wanted to see if love could exist without the weight of wealth. I failed. A murmur went through the crowd. But in that failure, I learned a valuable lesson about liability. Genevieve said, her eyes scanning the dark room until they locked onto Harrison. The spotlight swung, blinding Harrison and Bianca, illuminating them for the entire room to see. Harrison shielded his eyes, smiling nervously. He waved. My husband, Harrison Prestwick, is here tonight, Genevieve announced. He has recently filed a legal claim asserting that he is entitled to 50% of the Apex Group because we are still married. The crowd gasped. Whispers of gold digger and audacious rippled through the room. He believes, Genevieve went on, her voice hardening, that Apex is a marital asset, and under normal circumstances he would be right. Harrison's smile faltered. Normal circumstances. However, Genevieve said, reaching into the podium and pulling out a leather-bound book. Harrison seems to have forgotten the very first document he signed for me, not the divorce papers, but the document he signed the day we met. Harrison's blood ran cold. The day they met. They met at a coffee shop. He didn't sign anything. 3 years ago, Harrison, you were trying to secure a loan for your startup from a small angel investor fund called Hennis Ventures, Genevieve said. You didn't qualify, But the loan officer, me in disguise, liked you. I approved the loan. Do you remember the collateral agreement you signed?" Harrison racked his brain. He had signed hundreds of papers back then. He just wanted the money. "Clause 14, Section B," Genevieve recited from memory. "In the event of a default or a conflict of interest involving the principal investor, the borrower agrees that all future intellectual property and business assets created by the borrower shall be held as collateral by the lender until the debt is repaid." She paused for effect. "Harrison, you never repaid that loan. You rolled it over. You refinanced. But you never cleared the principal debt to Janus Ventures." She slammed the book shut. "And here is the twist, Harrison. Janus Ventures is the parent company of Apex Group. You didn't marry the owner of Apex. You married your creditor." The room went deadly silent. "Legally," Genevieve's voice boomed. "Since you defaulted on that original loan 2 years ago, I already own Prestwick Dynamics. I don't need to buy it. I don't need a hostile takeover. I triggered the collateral clause this morning." She gestured to the screen behind her. It displayed a legal document with Harrison's signature blown up for everyone to see. "Furthermore," she added, delivering the final blow, "since you are technically an employee of a subsidiary I own, your attempt to sue me for marital assets is a violation of your employment contract's non-compete and arbitration clause. You're fired, Harrison, and since you sued your employer frivolously, I am countersuing you for corporate espionage." Harrison stood there, the spotlight burning him. He felt Bianca pull her hand away from his arm. He looked at her. She was backing away, shaking her head. "I didn't know," Bianca whispered loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I didn't know he was a fraud." Harrison looked around. The Prime Minister of Luxembourg was laughing. The CEO of Goldman Sachs was shaking his head in pity. Harrison Prestwick hadn't just lost his company. He had walked into a trap 3 years in the making. Genevieve raised her glass. "To freedom," she said. "To freedom!" the crowd roared back. Harrison fell to his knees. 2 weeks later. The neon sign outside the Starlight Motel on Route 9 flickered with a maddening irregular rhythm. Buzz, click, darkness, buzz. The pink light bled through the thin stained curtains of room 114, washing the cramped space in a sickly artificial glow every 3 seconds. Harrison Prestwick sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, his head in his hands. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, industrial cleaning fluid, and the damp metallic scent of desperation. It was a far cry from the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. There were no heated marble floors here, no Egyptian cotton sheets, just a carpet that felt sticky under his bare feet, and a heater that rattled like a dying engine. The fall had not been a graceful descent. It had been a vertical drop. Within 48 hours of the Obsidian Gala, Harrison's life had been dismantled with surgical precision. The temporary restraining order on the Apex assets had been lifted, but a new freeze order, this one from the Securities and Exchange Commission, had slammed down on his personal accounts. Preston Gage, the shark who had promised him the world, had dropped him as a client via a text message. "Conflict of interest. Do not contact this office again." Harrison reached for the bottle of vodka on the nightstand. It was a plastic bottle, the kind sold on the bottom shelf of a liquor store. He poured 3 fingers into a plastic cup that had previously held a toothbrush. His hand shook. He took a drink, grimacing as the cheap spirit burned his throat. It was the only thing that dulled the noise in his head. He picked up the remote control held together by duct tape and aimed it at the tube television bolted to the wall. He shouldn't have turned it on. He knew what he would see. But he couldn't help himself. It was a form of self-flagellation. He flipped to CNBC. And there she was. Genevieve. She was standing on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The cacophony of traders shouting and phones ringing faded into the background as the camera zoomed in on her. She looked magnificent. She wore a tailored white suit that made her look like a modern-day knight. Her hair was styled perfectly, her skin glowing with health and vitality. She was smiling a genuine, confident smile he hadn't seen in years. The chyron at the bottom of the screen scrolled in bold red letters. Apex Group absorbs Prestwick Dynamics. CEO Genevieve Sinclair announces Phoenix Initiative. The anchor, a man Harrison had once bought drinks for at the Hamptons, spoke with breathless admiration. A masterclass in corporate restructuring. Ms. Sinclair, the previously silent partner, has effectively dissolved the debt-ridden Prestwick Dynamics, stripping it of its toxic assets and rebranding its core technology under the Apex banner. The stock is up 14% in pre-market trading. And what of Harrison Prestwick? The co-anchor asked. The camera cut back to Genevieve. A reporter thrust a microphone in her face. Miss Sinclair, do you have any comment on your ex-husband's involvement in the new direction of the company? Harrison leaned forward, holding his breath. Genevieve didn't flinch. She looked directly into the camera lens, and for a terrifying second, Harrison felt like she was looking through the TV screen, straight into his dingy motel room. The Phoenix Initiative is about rising from the ashes of bad management, Genevieve said smoothly. We are looking forward, not backward. The past is a sunk cost. We have written it off. Written it off. Harrison threw the plastic cup at the television. It bounced harmlessly off the screen, splashing vodka onto the dirty carpet. I built that company, he screamed at the empty room. I built the drone prototype. You're stealing my life. His voice cracked. There was no one to hear him. The only response was the sound of a heavy truck rumbling past on the highway outside, shaking the thin walls. He stood up and paced the small room. 3 steps to the bathroom, 3 steps back. He caught a glimpse of himself in the warped mirror above the dresser. He looked 20 years older. His eyes were bloodshot, sunken into dark hollows. He hadn't shaved in a week, and a patch of grey stubble covered his jaw. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and sweatpants he had bought at a Walmart 3 towns over. He checked his phone. No new messages, no missed calls. His friends, the guys he played poker with, the board members he golfed with, the politicians he donated to, had all vanished. When you lose your money in New York, you lose your gravity. You simply float away, and no one bothers to look up to see where you went. A sharp, aggressive banging on the door made him jump. Harrison froze. Was it the motel manager? He was 2 days late on the rent. Or maybe it was a process server with another lawsuit. Harrison, open up! The voice was muffled but unmistakable. Harrison rushed to the door, fumbling with the chain lock. He threw it open. Standing under the flickering pink neon light was Bianca Sterling. But this wasn't the Bianca who had sneered at Genevieve in the boardroom. This wasn't the woman who demanded first-class flights and vintage champagne. She looked like a wreck. She was wearing oversized grey sweatpants and a denim jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. Her blonde hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a messy, greasy bun. She wore no makeup, revealing pale skin and dark circles under her eyes that rivaled Harrison's own. She pushed past him into the room, bringing a gust of cold, rainy air with her. God, she said, wrinkling her nose as she looked around. It smells like death in here. Is this really the best you could do?" "Bianca," Harrison stammered, closing the door to shut out the noise of the highway. A desperate hope flared in his chest. She had come. She hadn't abandoned him. I didn't think you'd find me. I've been trying to call you, but your number was disconnected." "I changed it," she snapped. She didn't look at him. She was rummaging through his duffel bag on the floor. "I'm not here for a reunion, Harrison. I'm here for my things." "Your things?" Harrison asked, confused. "Everything is gone. The marshals took the penthouse. They towed the cars." Bianca stopped digging and stood up, her eyes blazing with fury. "The Cartier bracelet. The panther bracelet with the emerald eyes. I left it in the glove compartment of the Porsche the night of the gala. Did you take it? The Porsche?" Harrison laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "They took the Porsche 3 weeks ago. I don't have your bracelet, Bianca. I had to sell my watch just to pay for this dump." Bianca screamed a primal sound of frustration and kicked the duffel bag across the room. She slumped onto the unmade bed, burying her face in her hands. "My father cut me off," she mumbled into her palms. Harrison took a step closer. "What?" Bianca looked up, her eyes wet with angry tears. "Robert Sterling. My father. He saw the news. He saw the corporate espionage lawsuit Genevieve filed. He said I was a liability. He said I embarrassed the family name by associating with a fraud like you." "I'm not a fraud," Harrison pleaded, sitting next to her on the bed. He tried to put a hand on her shoulder, but she flinched away as if he were burning hot. "We were tricked. Bianca. Genevieve set us up. She hid her wealth. She trapped us." "She didn't trap us," Bianca spat, turning to face him. Her voice was venomous, low and cruel. "She just let us be ourselves, and it turns out we're idiots." She stood up, pacing the small space between the bed and the wall. "I tried to get a meeting with her yesterday," Bianca confessed. Harrison blinked. "You went to Apex." "I was desperate," Bianca cried. "I have no access to my trust fund. My credit cards are cancelled. I thought maybe she'd have mercy. I thought I could tell her I was a victim of your manipulation, that I could get a job." "You tried to sell me out?" Harrison asked, the betrayal stinging more than he expected. "Of course I tried to sell you out." Bianca laughed bitterly. "You have no value, Harrison. You're a sinking ship, and I'm drowning because I held on to your hand." "So what happened?" Harrison asked quietly. "Did you see her?" "No." Bianca wiped her nose with her sleeve. "She didn't even come down. She sent her assistant, some 20-year-old girl in a Prada suit. She handed me a pamphlet for a staffing agency in Queens and told me that if I ever stepped foot in the financial district again, she'd have me arrested for harassment." Bianca walked to the door and yanked it open. The neon light flooded back in, illuminating her tear-streaked face. "Where are you going?" Harrison asked, standing up. "Bianca, don't leave. We can figure this out. I have a plan. I just need to get in touch with—" "You have nothing!" Bianca screamed, her voice cracking. "You are a nobody! Harrison! You were a nobody when she found you, and you're a nobody now. The only reason you ever mattered was because she was propping you up. And me, I'm ruined because I bet on the wrong horse." She stepped out into the rain. "Don't follow me," she warned. "I'm going to my mother's in Connecticut. I'm going to beg for forgiveness. And I'm going to forget I ever knew your name." She slammed the door. Harrison stared at the wood grain of the cheap door. He heard her footsteps splashing through the puddles, then the sound of a car engine starting, likely an Uber she had scraped together the last of her cash to pay for. then silence. Harrison was truly alone. He looked back at the television. Genevieve was still on the screen, shaking hands with the chairman of the Federal Reserve. She looked powerful. She looked happy. Harrison sank to the floor, his back against the bed frame. He pulled his knees to his chest. The room felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. The walls were closing in. He reached for the plastic bottle of vodka again, but he knocked it over. The liquid spilled out, soaking into the carpet, spreading like a dark stain. He didn't bother to clean it up. He just watched it spread, realizing that for the first time in his life, there was no one coming to clean up his mess. The elevator ride to the penthouse of the 432 Park Avenue Tower took exactly 45 seconds. For Harrison Prestwick, it felt like a descent into hell, even though he was moving upwards. 6 weeks had passed since the Obsidian Gala. 6 weeks since the name Prestwick went from a symbol of tech innovation to a punchline on late-night talk shows. Harrison stood in the corner of the elevator cab, staring at his reflection in the polished brass control panel. The man looking back was a stranger. His suit, once a bespoke Brioni that cost $4,000, was gone. He was wearing a rack-bought polyester blend he'd picked up at a discount store in Jersey City for $90. It was too tight in the shoulders and hung loose at the waist, a physical reminder of the 10 pounds he'd lost from stress and missed meals. His face was grey, the eyes sunken, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who spent his nights listening to the sirens outside a motel window. He wasn't here to fight. He couldn't afford a lawyer to fight. He was here because the summons had been specific. Come alone to collect the final settlement of the estate or forfeit all claims. The elevator chimed, a soft, polite sound that signaled the end of his journey. The doors slid open. Harrison stepped into the foyer. The air smelled different, sterile, cold. The scent of Genevieve's lilies and the warm vanilla candles she used to burn was gone, replaced by the chemically neutral smell of professional cleaners. The apartment was a skeleton. The 10-foot Basquiat painting that had hung in the hallway, the one he had bought to impress a visiting venture capitalist, was gone. The marble console table where he used to toss his keys was gone. The floor was bare, the expensive Persian runners rolled up and taken away. It was a graveyard of his ambition. In the living room, Harrison. Her voice didn't echo. It was absorbed by the vast emptiness of the space. Harrison walked slowly into the main room. The floor-to-ceiling windows still offered the same billion-dollar view of Central Park and the glittering Manhattan skyline. But tonight, the city looked like a circuit board he had been locked out of. Genevieve was standing by the window. She wasn't wearing the power suits she had donned for the takeover, nor the glamorous velvet of the gala. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and dark jeans. She looked comfortable. She looked like the wife he used to ignore while he checked his emails. But the posture was different. There was no slump in her shoulders. She held a crystal tumbler of water in one hand, looking out at the city she now effectively owned a significant piece of. "You changed the locks," Harrison said. His voice was raspy. He cleared his throat, trying to summon a shred of his old authority. "The doorman. He made me show ID, like a delivery boy." Genevieve turned. Her face was unreadable. Not angry. Not happy. Just strikingly neutral. "You are a delivery boy tonight, Harrison," she said calmly. "You're delivering the last of your pride. And in exchange, I'm giving you your life back." She gestured to the only piece of furniture left in the room, a small portable card table set up in the center of the vast floor with 2 folding chairs. On the table sat a single, thick envelope. Harrison walked toward it, his heart hammering against his ribs. The settlement, Preston Gage. His treacherous former lawyer had told him that Genevieve could drag this out for years. She could bury him in litigation until he starved. The fact that she was offering a settlement so quickly meant something. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe the dutiful housewife was still in there somewhere, feeling bad for the man she had loved. Maybe it's $1 million. Harrison thought a desperate hope flaring in his chest. If it's $1 million, I can start over. I can move to Austin or Miami. I can build something new. He reached the table but didn't sit. He looked at her. Is this it? The payoff? It's the calculation, Genevieve said, walking over to stand on the opposite side of the table. Please, sit. Harrison sat. The metal chair was cold and hard. I've spent the last month auditing Prestwick Dynamics. Genevieve began, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. It was a forensic nightmare, Harrison. You were leveraging debt to pay off interest on other debt. You were counting projected sales as realized revenue. It was a Ponzi scheme with a nice logo. I was scaling. Harrison snapped, the defensive reflex kicking in. You don't understand high-growth tech. You have to burn cash to, I own the bank that lent you the cash. Genevieve cut him off, her voice sharpening just a fraction. Do not lecture me onto finance. I understand it better than you ever did. I looked for value, Harrison. I looked for something in that company, or in our marriage that had tangible, salvageable equity. She tapped the envelope. I looked for the patents. They were derivative. I looked for the client list. They were mostly one-time buyers who hated the product. I looked at our 3 years of marriage. I looked for the moments where you supported me. The moments where you asked me how my day was. The moments where you weren't looking over my shoulder at a notification on your phone. She paused, her eyes searching his face, looking for a man who didn't exist anymore. I found nothing, Harrison. The balance sheet of our life together is 0. Harrison felt the anger rising hot and shameful. Then why am I here? If I'm worth nothing, why bring me here to humiliate me? You've already done that on global television. No, Genevieve said softly. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to balance the ledger. Because there was one asset, one initial investment that was never repaid. Harrison stared at the envelope. What are you talking about? Open it. Harrison's hands trembled as he picked up the envelope. He undid the clasp. He reached inside. He pulled out a check. He stared at the number. He blinked, thinking he had misread the zeros. $50,000. He looked up, his mouth agape. Is this a joke? 50 grand. I was the CEO of a company valued at $400 million. My liquid assets alone were... Your liquid assets were frozen to pay the SEC fines, Genevieve interrupted. And the $400 million valuation was a fantasy you sold to investors. This check, this is real. She leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. 3 years ago, on November the 12th, you sat in a coffee shop on 4th Street. You were crying. You didn't know I was watching. You were on the phone with your father, telling him you were going to quit, that New York had beaten you. Harrison froze. He remembered that day. It was the lowest point of his life. I was the loan officer at Janus Ventures who approved your application the next day. Genevieve revealed, her voice dropping to a whisper. Everyone else rejected you. Your credit score was 620. Your business plan was written in crayon, metaphorically speaking. But I saw a spark. I saw a man who was hungry. So I overruled the risk assessment. I gave you $50,000 of seed money. She pointed to the check in his hand. That is what you are holding, Harrison. I am returning your seed money. I am giving you a reset button. Harrison crushed the check in his fist. This is an insult. I built an empire. You built a house of cards on a foundation I paid for. Genevieve's voice finally rose, echoing off the bare walls, cracking with 3 years of suppressed emotion. I gave you the money. I gave you the home. I gave you the stability. And when you finally made it, when you finally got to the top, you looked at me, the woman who built the ladder you climbed, and you called me useless. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison looked down at his cheap shoes. The truth of her words hit him harder than any lawsuit. He remembered the nights she stayed up helping him format pitch decks, claiming she was just proofreading. He remembered how she managed their budget so he could buy expensive suits to impress clients. He had divorced his greatest asset because she didn't look like a trophy. I loved you, Jen, Harrison whispered, the fight draining out of him. In the beginning. I did. Genevieve's expression softened, but it was a sad, distant softness. I know. That's why I'm giving you the check. Consider it a refund for a failed investment. She stood up and walked toward the elevator. You have until midnight to vacate the premises, she said, her back to him. The movers are coming tomorrow to strip the copper wiring. I'm gutting the place. I can't live here. The air is too thin. Jen, Harrison called out. He stood up the chair, scraping loudly against the floor. What am I supposed to do? Where do I go? Genevieve pressed the elevator button. She looked back at him over her shoulder. The city lights framed her silhouette, making her look like a goddess of vengeance, or perhaps mercy. You go to Ohio, Harrison, or Nebraska, or anywhere that isn't here, she said. You take that $50,000 and you try to build something real this time. Build something that doesn't require lying to the people who love you. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Wait. Harrison took a step forward. If I change, if I prove to you that I can be the man you thought I was? Genevieve shook her head slowly. The doors began to slide shut. I already own the company, Harrison. I don't need to buy the prototype again. Click. The doors sealed. The soft whir of the motor signaled her ascent to the roof where her helicopter was likely waiting. Harrison was left alone in the empty penthouse. He looked down at the crumpled piece of paper in his hand. A cashier's check for $50,000. He looked out the window at the city. The rain had started again, blurring the lights of New York into streaks of gold and red. Down there, millions of people were fighting for a scrap of what he had just lost. He walked to the window and pressed his hand against the cold glass. He was back where he started, but this time he was older. He was tired, and he knew with a certainty that settled into his bones like a chill that he would never reach these heights again. He turned, picked up his coat, and walked toward the service elevator. He didn't belong in the main lobby anymore. As he walked out into the cold drizzle of Park Avenue, Harrison Prestwick vanished into the crowd, just another face in the rush-hour tide clutching a check that cost him everything. Harrison Prestwick walked out of that penthouse with $50,000, but he left behind a fortune worth far more than money. He left behind the loyalty of the only person who truly saw him. It's a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. When you trade integrity for status, you often end up with neither. Genevieve didn't destroy him. She simply let him experience the consequences of his own valuation. She returned him to his factory settings and let the world decide what he was really worth. What would you have done in Genevieve's shoes? Would you have given him the $50,000 or would you have left him with absolutely nothing? I want to hear your take in the comments. Let's get a debate going. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a new story coming next week about a billionaire who went undercover as a janitor in his own company. And you won't believe what he found. Thanks for watching. And remember, never mistake silence for ignorance.